Hey, good morning and welcome to today's webinar, The Benefits of Brain Health for Older Adults. We thank all of you for being here and wish you a Happy New Year. These complimentary webinars are brought to you through a collaboration with several partners, and today we're welcoming a new partner. So our thanks to Care Choices, Hospice and Palliative Services, O'Connor Mortuary, as well as Alzheimer's Orange County. And then today we're welcoming our new partner, Caring Companions at Home. And so as most of you know, the point of this series, this monthly series, is to really provide topics of interest that are beneficial for anyone who cares for or works with older adults. So although a lot of our audience consists of professionals, we're also welcoming our family caregivers as well. And so we hope for everyone that the topics are helpful in your work with your loved ones and with your clients. So I'm really excited today because we have our own Carrie Walker as our speaker to present on this important topic. And Carrie is the Director of Education here at Alzheimer's Orange County, where she oversees the organization's education programs for families and professionals. Carrie holds a master's degree in gerokinesiology from Cal State Fullerton, where she became a certified fall-proof instructor. Carrie is also a certified memory educator, and she received her training in that at the Longevity Center at UCLA, and she's approved to teach proven memory and brain health strategies to people with mild memory challenges. And she helped to develop the successful Healthy Brain Initiative for Alzheimer's Orange County, which includes memory screenings free memory screenings here on the first Friday of each month, brain health workshops, and cognitive exercise programs for seniors in the community. So Carrie, of course, comes to us with a wealth of information, and we're excited to have her share that with us. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Carrie, and welcome.
I am very pleased to be here. This is one of my favorite topics, I think, because it's actually focusing on something that we can do. So this, as I said, this is one of my favorite presentations because it really is empowering and it gives us something that we actually can do to affect how we age. Today we're going to be taking a look at discussing changes that do occur normally in memory and learning as we age. Just as our body ages, our brain ages too. So we need to be cognizant about what's normal and what's not normal. We're going to take a look at some lifestyle behaviors that are actually considered a threat and are detrimental to us having a healthy brain as we age. And then once we identify those, we're going to turn our attention to looking at what can we do in our daily lifestyle that can actually be protective of our brain health. And then kind of finishing up with tying it all together and looking at what we can do by taking small steps in our individual lives that will make a difference. And I wanted to mention to those of you that might be listening that are administrators and have people, residents living with you, I would encourage you, as we go through this presentation, I would imagine that most everybody is familiar with this information to some degree or another. But the challenge is most people, when they hear this information, listen to it, agree, but don't actually make the changes in their life. So if you are an administrator or are working with older adults, such as a nurse or a social worker, I want you to be thinking about how you can provide this information to the people that you're working with in a way that they can take it in, internalize it, really get it, and be motivated to make some changes. So beginning with aging in itself, it's important to realize that I think if we look at one 20-year-old person compared to another 20-year-old person, there isn't that much difference in terms of how young they may look. However, you've probably noticed a greater difference as we get closer to age 50. Some people who have have the blessing of great genes, maybe have a healthy lifestyle, a 50-year-old person like that may be looking closer to 40-year-old in age. Whereas maybe somebody who's been a victim of illness, perhaps hasn't taken as good of care of themselves, can be also biological age 50 and look quite older, maybe 60. So this is when we really start seeing a difference in terms of how our lifestyle is impacting our aging. The three factors we typically consider have a bearing on how well we age are genes, environment, and lifestyle. And again, I think the most exciting thing here is that the last two, environment and lifestyle, are largely within our control. In fact, another bright spot on the genetic horizon is researchers are finding that how we take care of our bodies in terms of diet and exercise, sleep, and stress reduction can actually alter the genetic expression. So that means that even if we have a predisposition, for example, to heart disease because of our parents, how we take care of our bodies could override that genetic expression in our lives. So as we age, our body ages, and so does our brain. We may also find some of these things listed here. All of a sudden, you're in the middle of a sentence and you forget the next word. You may have a little bit more difficulty multitasking. You may find that your processing speed is slowing down. However, it's important to recognize that no matter how old you are, you can still learn new things. You are creating new memories, and you can still improve your vocabulary and language skills. And by learning new things, you may be thinking to yourself, I'm not in school anymore. I'm not really learning new things. Well, consider if you go on a vacation and you're in a hotel that you've never been at before. The fact that you are able to successfully leave your room and find your way to the front desk without asking directions is an indication that you have actually learned some new memories about the navigation of that hotel, and you are able to find yourself back at the lobby even though you've only been there, you've just recently been there. So as I said, we're going to look at our threats to brain health. I want you to take a step back from your life, if you may, take a deep breath and kind of look at what you're doing in your life from an outsider perspective. Really assess what in your life, what in your environment could be causing some negative impacts on your brain. Looking at the screen here, I think there's no question everybody would agree these three things, images up here, signify threats to brain health. Smoking, of course, there's toxins, also to yourself and others. French fries, let's see, probably maybe too much salt in there, extra fat, processed fats, and alcohol. But these three things also we do in response to stress. It could also be that we're not getting enough sleep. So there's a lot of kind of things intertwined here in brain threats. Medications or improper uses of them are also a threat to brain health. It's important when you have an older adult in your life that's taking some medication, especially if they're taking maybe more than a handful of medications, that make sure that they're taking them in the proper dosage, and also checking in with pharmacy and physician to make sure that there's not some overlapping effect that they're not aware of. Heart disease is a huge problem that leads to brain health, because what's good for the heart is good for the brain, because the brain needs so much blood and oxygen pumped to it. Other things listed here, stress and sleep, we'll go over in a greater detail in the next couple of slides. We're going to take a look at the importance of sleep for the brain. Oftentimes, the reason we sleep is because we're tired, and when we wake up, we feel refreshed. I know myself, I thought that the benefits of sleep was more for my physical body, but we're finding out right now how important it is for the brain itself. There's certain activities that occur while we sleep that don't occur during other times of our day. what actually happens is it's like a cleanup crew comes into the brain at night when we're sleeping. And during different stages of the sleep, there's molecules that come into the brain and break down substances and molecules that we don't need anymore. And there's other processes that come and just like clean that up and then flush it out into the system, and it's released through the body as waste. Very critical that that happens. In fact, I want to take a moment to point out that on the second bullet point on this slide, the brain clears out the beta amyloid. All of our brains produce amyloid as a basic metabolic function all of our life. And during sleep, at least I've heard researchers say that up to 12% of that beta amyloid can be cleared on a nightly basis. That's really critically important as it relates to Alzheimer's disease, because one of the components that's associated with Alzheimer's disease is having a buildup of this substance in the brain. So by not allowing enough sleep during our nights, we are actually impeding the brain in getting rid of the very substance that contributes to Alzheimer's disease. On average, we say that we should try to get at least 7 to 8 hours a day, and also having a normal sleep-wake schedule and not waking up intermittently, because then it interrupts the sleep process where a lot of these different clearings occur. However, even knowing all these pieces about how much sleep we're supposed to get and it should be uninterrupted, only 48% of adults over 50 actually get enough sleep to keep their brains healthy. And to top it off, even as we age, it becomes increasingly more difficult to sleep, kind of working against us. We need to recognize that as part of the aging changes, sleep does become less deep, and therefore, of course, it's easier for us to get woken up. We're more vulnerable to those disturbances. If you're living in a community environment, people coming in and out of the room, if you're in a hospital, people coming in and taking vital signs, just different distractions depending on where you live. And just being mindful that because we are more prone to be more sensitive to these things, kind of taking a look at what can we do in our environment to make a difference to help us sleep more deeply. Because certainly we have found that people with chronic sleep deficit are at much higher risk for all these other diseases. Again, I think that this is an exciting fact because this is something that we could possibly try to mitigate through lifestyle changes. So getting a regular sleep schedule is really crucial. And if you are working in a community environment where you have residents, or if you're a nurse or a medical practitioner and you have patients, really taking a look, what can you do to help your clients and your patients have a more regular sleep schedule? These are some of the things that are listed: exercise regularly, restricting food and fluids 3 hours before going to bed. Really thinking about it. If you probably don't want to serve a huge glass of lemonade to somebody because you're trying to hydrate them and keep them with fluids right before bed, because what happens next? Of course, we need to use the restroom. That's going to trigger the person to be woken up. And exercising regularly. Take a look, how can we actually do that? All of these things on this slide are great suggestions, but my challenge to you is, how do we actually incorporate these into our lives, or help somebody incorporate them into their own lives? Some of the thoughts I had were, in terms of exercising regularly, would you want to suggest that let's get a residence walking group that walks after each meal? Helps them feel better, helps them digest their food, and could actually help them sleep better during the night. And then, of course, being mindful that caffeine also can lurk in other things like chocolate that could keep them up at night. Sleep apnea. Sleep apnea actually disrupts the flow of oxygen to the brain. And It also can lead to high blood pressure, stroke, all of these, of course, which will have bearing on memory loss and brain health. Believe it or not, when someone has sleep apnea, even if they're very young, they can actually present the signs of dementia. So it is really critical that if you find that if you know that you have sleep apnea, or a loved one or client, that you work with a medical practitioner to try to figure out some devices that may help reduce the incidence. Stress. Chronic stress can definitely cause quite a few health problems. But we never stop to take a look maybe at what does that mean? How is it really affecting my body? The presence, when we're under stress, our body produces abnormal amounts of cortisol. It's a hormone. And in the right dosage, a little bit of this hormone provide, just similar to like a spice to food, enough stimulus to keep us alert, to give us motivation to do things, to start things, to pay attention to detail, and certainly in terms of if there's any dangers, to be able to go into that flight or fight mode to escape any danger, get ourselves out of a predicament. However, chronic stress keeps this cortisol level high, circulating as if the stress is still present, if the danger is still present. And unfortunately, the elevated levels of cortisol can actually work against the brain, inhibiting the blood-brain barrier and causing dementia-like symptoms. In fact, it can actually lead to a hardwiring between the frontal cortex and the amygdala in the brain. And what that is, the frontal cortex is responsible for reasoning, logic, processing in the brain, and then the amygdala is responsible for emotion. And what can happen when stress is present for abnormal amounts of time is there's like just a track that gets grooves between those two parts of the brain, between fight and flight, and it creates a constant panic that the person has a very difficult time disengaging from. So those are some of the things to think about when we say we need to reduce our stress. Stress does have physiological long-term effects on the brain. Some of the ways that we can reduce it are by getting more sleep, increasing our cognitive activity, making sure that we exercise our brain, and also social engagement. So, with all that said, taking a look at all the threats in our world, what can we do to protect our brain health? The good news is we can take a look at changes in our diet and nutrition, how much we're exercising, how much we're using our brain and thinking, cognitive exercise, and also how much and how often are we engaging in other people in our lives and keeping ourselves active. All of these things, we're going to take a look and see how they make a difference in keeping a healthy brain. When we think about diet and nutrition, of course, we think about the foods we like to eat. How many times have you been hungry, sat down to eat, and you're no longer hungry, so you assume, of course, that you have you've satisfied your nutrition. I've eaten my food, I'm not hungry, that's all I need to worry about. Unfortunately, even though we're not living in a third world country, so many of Americans actually are very malnourished. And what that means is they're not getting the sufficient components in their food, vitamins, minerals, etc., that they need to actually run their body. We don't think about our bodies as cars. Oftentimes when I've given a workshop on brain health, I will ask the audience, how many of you change the oil in your car regularly? And immediately hands, rush up. And in fact, I find that some people are almost insulted that I've even asked the question suggesting that they don't regularly maintain the oil in their car and change it. But then when I ask people, okay, well, why do you do that? Why is that so important? And the answers usually range from, well, prevent an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Keeping your car in good shape through maintenance is much less expensive. It maintains the length and the age of your car. But when I say, then why don't we apply that philosophy to our bodies, people are at a loss. So the challenge is to start to look at food as a prescription, because what we put into our bodies definitely has bearing on how we're feeling and how it's running. We need to eat to supply our bodies with the components it needs to move, to think, and to work. And we need enough calories to supply our brains with glucose. We need to have consume essential amino acids and fatty acids that our bodies cannot make. So what that means is if our bodies don't make certain nutrients, we actually need to consume them and get them from our food. And if we're not obtaining them from our food and our body's not making them, our body, similar to a car, is going to try to run on the wrong fuel. And it's just over time, it will break down. We need to have antioxidants in our fruits and vegetables to guard against oxidative stress in our bodies. When we give recommendations for diet, it's not, I think a lot of people think this is what you need to do. Well, I don't like those foods, so I'm not going to eat them, or I don't need to eat them all the time. I'm still okay. But we don't take a moment to dive deeper to really understand, why do we need to eat those foods? Well, it turns out that the majority of the foods in the diet that are recommended for brain health actually contain the vast majority of all the essential components that our body and our brain needs to stay healthy. And if we don't eat those foods, that means we're not getting the proper fuels to run our body or run our car, if that makes more sense. The omega-3 fatty acids are essential to brain health. And I will take a moment to focus on sugar here. Sugar is actually toxic to the body. It produces what we call neuroinflammation. It causes inflammation in the body and especially in the brain. And anytime there is inflammation, our bodies are more prone to disease. So anything that we can do to reduce inflammation reduces our likelihood of obtaining disease and our tissues not functioning well. One of the other things that sugar does is it reduces the production of a chemical in our brain called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. I know it's kind of a mouthful. It's called a BDNF. And BDNF is wonderful. It's produced by the brain when we exercise. And there are levels that are maintained in the brain overall during the day. But what this wonderful molecule does is it actually protects the hippocampus part of the brain. And the hippocampus is responsible for short-term memory. So by consuming so much sugar, that actually reduces the production of the very molecule that can actually protect our brain. Sugar has an effect on connectivity in the brain. When we eat sugar, our pancreas produces insulin. And insulin triggers the cells in our bodies to open up their doors, if you will, and take in that sugar so they can use it as fuel. But when you were eating too much sugar and too frequently during the day, the body really never stops producing insulin. So our brain can become insulin resistant. It's no longer responding appropriately to the signals. And that can have a negative effect on the connectivity in our brain. Proper portion sizes. This is something to think about. The new food pyramid, I don't know if you all remember whether we had that pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid, the smallest portions were the fats, what we were supposed to eat. And as it went down the pyramid, it kind of gave you an idea of how much of the different food groups you should eat, how many fruits and vegetables, how much of a protein, like meat, chicken, fish. But it really wasn't helpful in terms of, okay, what does that mean? So when I'm at the buffet line, what should be on my plate? So the new food pyramid actually shows a picture of a plate and gives you a better idea of really what it should look like. And your brain takes at least 20 minutes to register when you're full. So it's better to take a little more time when you're eating and eat more slowly to make sure that you're not overeating, because that can add to a lot of other complications. Overeating can lead to obesity. And as I said much earlier in the presentation, what's good for the heart is good for the brain. So if we are doing things that are negative for our heart and create problems such as hypertension, high cholesterol from the foods that we eat, those are also going to negatively impact our brain. The other piece of good news is exercise. Exercising can have a huge impact on our brain health. In fact, some research is suggesting that if you just introduce exercise into your life as a variable all of its own, not really making changes in other aspects such as your diet or your job or anything else, you can live up to 20 years longer. I think that is huge. Exercise improves blood flow to the brain, bringing the healthy nutrients and oxygen to the brain to keep it healthy. It also makes sure that the molecules, the waste molecules in your brain are taken away. And the benefits, specific benefits, it reduces the risk of disease occurring and dementia, diabetes, stroke. It also keeps your muscles strong. We actually lose 10% of our muscle mass each decade as we age. And if we're not doing anything to make sure that we maintain that muscle, we will lose it. We don't think about it. We think, well, gosh, I don't need to go to the gym anymore. Why do I need to do squats? Anytime you move your body, that means you're using muscle. And that is why we need to exercise to keep those muscles strong. I remember when I was working in a senior living community, there was a woman, an 80-year-old woman, who fell. And the cause of her fall was not a lack of lower body strength or balance problems. It was lack of upper body strength. What she was doing is she was ironing, but the iron was way too heavy for her. And because she couldn't pick up the iron just using arm strength, she put her body into it to kind of give it a little bit of a oomph. And she ended up stumbling and falling and breaking a hip. So exercise is very critical for your body, keeping yourself from falling. That's another problem of hitting your head. But also now we're seeing how much exercise has a benefit directly to brain health. What it does is it actually stimulates the production of that BDNF that I mentioned a couple slides ago. That's brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And when you exercise, your brain produces this, and it's actually protective of that hippocampus, which is responsible for a short-term memory loss. And we have found, many people have said, well, gosh, if that's the case, why can't I inject some of that? Researchers have tried that, trying to inject this brain-derived neurotrophic factor into someone's brain to see if it would then provide that protective benefit. It does not. It was a nice thought, but that doesn't work. We've got to produce it on our own. So that's one thing. The other thing that physical exercise does, it actually stimulates the production of new neurons. And that is really essential because things throughout life, such as some of those toxic things, alcohol mainly, maybe head trauma, over time we lose brain cells. When I was going to school, they always said that you only were born with a set amount of brain cells, and if you did anything to damage those, that was it. You were out of luck. But now science is showing that we can actually regenerate additional brain cells and additional synapses through physical exercise, and that again is very exciting. Also, some of the additional benefits of people that exercise, are the increased endorphins. That feeling good, you'll hear that runner's high that people get. And what's happening in the brain is your brain, when you exercise, it stimulates the production of dopamine, and that makes you feel better. You also are able to think more clearly. People that have been on a treadmill, just moderately walking for 20 minutes, and then taking a test, score much higher consistently than another group of people who has not been on the treadmill and taken the same test. So the exercise increases the dopamine production, which gives you more mental clarity. It gives you the flush of that feel-good feeling. Exercise also can help with decreased inflammation throughout the body and the neurons. So again, remembering that inflammation can also be a trigger for disease and any other brain disease, including Alzheimer's. Exercise, again, helps in that area. Exercise, by building those neurons, increases brain volume. So there's so many physiological benefits to exercise, and it's important to remember that a little is better than nothing. I'm reminded by the story of a gentleman that had been stricken with quite a few health issues and had really not walked in a couple years. He really wasn't able to walk unassisted very far from his couch. And you may have written him off. He's not going to get any better. Well, he decided to really subscribe to the theory that let's just do a little bit. His goal every day was to walk from his couch to the end of his dining room table. That's what he did every week. And then every day, for a week. And then the next week, he challenged himself to go around to the second side of the table. Each week, he added maybe a couple yards of increment. And do you know that within a year, he was walking around his block? So it's important when you're taking a look at how to increase your physical activity, you really need to be realistic about where you're at. And it is also important to consult with a healthcare provider. Our bodies are not like a car, unfortunately, that comes with all those indicator lights where we can look at that panel and see what's going on underneath the surface. We don't know where our heart is in terms of does it have adequate, what rate is it at, what's our blood pressure, all these things. We need to know those numbers. Numbers are our friends. Plus, they're going to be able to help us track our successes. We're going to be able to track if what we're doing, what we're eating, how we're exercising, has it reduced our cholesterol. It actually becomes very fun and rewarding when you can implement some changes in your life, and then you go and you check your numbers and you can see an improvement. Part of the reason I think that we stay stuck is that we rely on others to motivate us instead of taking more of the bull by the horns and seeing what we can do. So again, it's important to be realistic, and we've got to start where we're at. If you read a study that says running a mile will help increase your brain fitness, well, if you can't run a mile, you may say to yourself, well, this doesn't work. There's no reason for me to even think any more along these lines. Well, if you can't run a mile, you have to start with, okay, maybe we can walk a block, and you can work up to that point. Cognitive activity is another area of what we refer to as a pillar of brain health that actually can create new neurons in our brain. That, again, is very exciting because as we age, our brains do shrink a little bit naturally if we're not doing something to challenge our brains and to keep that blood flow. So that's exciting because if as we lose neurons as we age, the more we can actually work against that and put these new cells, so to speak, in a bank account, it's going to really help us down the line. Cognitive stimulating activities, crossword puzzles, word finds are all good. But the key is you need to do something that's going to stimulate your brain above and beyond how it normally is. All these things are good, and they're better than not doing something. But for example, if you're already a whiz at crossword puzzles, you should think about doing Sudoku or doing some brain teasers. think learning a new language. Learning a new language is often touted as being so great for brain fitness because it engages quite a few different areas of the brain. The more areas of the brain that we can engage, the more influx of blood and oxygen, the better. Cognitive stimulating activities help people cope as they age because they allow a person to continue to multitask more efficiently. Multitasking is very, very important. Sometimes we over multitask. We're not talking about that, but even just walking and talking is multitasking. And one of the reasons why older adults, one of the reasons I should say, fall is that they aren't able to multitask as much. A person gets more distracted as they get older, so they're more likely to fall. There's new studies coming out, especially in Parkinson's, too, showing that different physical activity programs, such as boxing, can actually reduce the expression of symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Again, we're not necessarily understanding exactly how this is working, but we are definitely seeing a correlation. And again, I think that's very exciting. These are some examples to get you thinking about cognitive stimulating activities. Kind of think about these things and have them on your mind so that as you're going out and about running errands, you can pick up, I'm standing in line at the grocery store. There's a crossword puzzle book. Maybe I should do that. Or, I can pick up that Sudoku book. Or, here I am. I always wanted to learn that. Let me think about that. Just kind of always be keeping an open mind to think about what you can do differently. We often get so wrapped up in our schedule and we're busy, but if we actually look to see how many different things did we do, a lot of our day is spent planning and running from one activity to another and not really focusing on doing any of these specific things. We need to make the time for that. Social engagement, although we don't understand quite as concretely how social engagement helps our brain, I think it would be fair to say that if you have friends that you connect to on a regular basis and have people that you can share your feelings with, you're less likely to be depressed. It's going to also increase the likelihood that you will have other people that can distract you from your maybe different challenges you're facing. They can make suggestions. The worst thing we can do when we're depressed is to isolate. We may know all the positive things that will keep us from not isolating. I know if I'm depressed, I should probably pick up the phone and call somebody. I should probably eat some really healthy foods with antioxidants that are going to help with my stress. I should probably get more sleep. I should probably go exercise. But when you're depressed, you don't want to do any of these. And especially if you're isolated, you are more likely not only to do the healthy things that you should do, but you're more likely to do those that you aren't. Kind of going back to that screen that showed the cigarette smoke, some of the alcohol, and the French fries. So it's very, it's encouraged to have people around you and engaged in regular social activities. Have things that are planned, things that you enjoy. Even if it's meeting a group of friends at the coffee shop once every Friday morning to talk and catch up. Very, very important. It is also important, too, that when the brain is similar to a muscle, if you don't use it, you will lose it. So we need to create the activities for those opportunities. Okay, we've taken a look at, so far to sum up, we've taken a look at some of the differences between unhealthy brain aging and healthy brain aging. We need recognizing that as we age, our body ages, our brain ages. So there are some changes we are going to notice in our cognition and in those around us as they age. However, there are certain things that we need to be able to identify in our environment, our lifestyle choices that are contributing to keeping us stuck and maybe not providing the best environment for our brain to age in. So taking a look at what those are in our life, and also evaluating if it's ourselves, why are we wanting to do that? Are they, if I know that I am prone to maybe get a little depressed at a certain time of year, does it make sense that I have a couple bottles of wine at my house? Does it make sense that I cut off my gym membership? Things like that, kind of thinking ahead about how do we get into these situations. And as administrators, I would encourage you to evaluate your environment. Are you incorporating health? Most people are incorporating healthy foods into what they offer the residents, but how do we get people on board with that? Most people live independently all their life. They're typically not living rather in a community environment, such as in an assisted living. However, and then we all have our individual preferences on what we like to do, what we like to eat. And now all of a sudden, everybody's grouped in one cluster. So how do we help get people on board with a new healthy eating pattern? How do we get them to buy into it? And I think really taking the opportunity to empower our residents, educate them in bite-sized pieces in a way that they can take on that information. I know Dr. Oz, regardless of what anybody might think about his credentials or what he says, I find that because he presents information in like snippets that are exciting, bite-sized pieces that people can take in, people typically are very receptive. So how could we incorporate that in like small signs, in the senior living communities? Flame Broiler, I know I was in there the other day, and they had a poster of a beautiful picture of cabbage. You never would think cabbage is beautiful, but it was well done, and there was some great nutritional facts about how cabbage actually helped the body and helped the digestive system. So, how could we do pieces like that rather than just tell people, well, this is good for you? Help them understand why. What nutrients are in this food that's actually, and how are those particular nutrients going to help their brain health? And teach them how these choices are going to lead to their independence. Also, when you're considering how do you present this information to parents you may be taking care of. I had a very personal experience recently. My mom chose not to really buy into the whole exercise program thing all of her life. Never really ate healthy. She claims that when she was growing up as a young child, she would eat a piece of bread and have coffee for breakfast. So that's what she's continued most of her life. Unfortunately, right now, she has cancer. We're not sure how much longer she has to live. And the cancer is, it's from secondhand smoke when she was caring for my sister. And also a lot of it would be hard not to imagine that a lot of this couldn't have been at least mitigated somewhat by different lifestyle choices. And it's very difficult, even now when there might be a slight chance that we could maybe add a little bit more time to her life, she's still not wanting to make healthy eating choices. And I found myself, I was in that very kind of overly zealous daughter, trying to get her to eat these things and doing a lot of telling and directing. That doesn't work. I'm sure we've all recognized that. But so be thinking about tips, just focusing on a couple different pieces of how your suggestion, when you make a suggestion about a healthy lifestyle habit to somebody that you want them to come on board with, you want to tell them what it is, help them understand how it actually is going to make a difference in their life. And then the last piece is you need to actually work with them to help them figure out, how can I integrate that change into my life? For example, we tell people they need to eat more healthy, leafy green vegetables. Okay, well, the leafy green vegetables have these nutrients that our body needs, and we list them out. But if a person doesn't have a recipe, do I just throw that leafy green in a salad? I don't really like salads, or maybe I have a diet that I can't eat salads, then what do I do? Am I out of luck? So we really have to take a little bit more time to help people figure out how to really implement that change. So in summary, in order to have a larger impact and to help people set their goals, The goals should be specific rather than just, I'll eat better. Well, what does better mean? So we need to be specific. A goal should be measurable, such as I'm going to eat better. Well, better is not necessarily measurable. It also needs to be obtainable. Setting unrealistic goals really makes people feel that they failed, and they're less likely to get back on the saddle after they've fallen out. So an example of a goal that followed, we call these a SMART goal. The last piece is it should be realistic and also have a time frame. Is I'm going to add more leafy green vegetables to my diet every week. I'm going to have 3 servings per week, and I'm going to do that by incorporating kale. And I'm going to I can put the kale in chop it up and put it in my lasagna. I am going to put it in a smoothie. Actually really work all of that out. Other examples of brain health activities that you want to add to your life is you could choose, I'm going to join a chess group. I'm going to join a bridge group. I'm going to go to a movie, like a foreign film. Just challenge yourself. It's got to be fun, because if it's not fun, you're not going to incorporate it and maintain it. It's also important to write down what you're doing. The more clear and in front of you that this goal is every day, the more likely you are to obtain it. You don't want to create an atmosphere, though, of fear or failure, so that if you don't do it, that you give up. You want to choose something very small that's more attainable, so as you obtain that small goal, then you set a larger one, and you can keep adding as you go. You should also celebrate the progress along the way. Changing lifestyle is not easy. Most people aren't mindful of even choices that they're making through the day. So if you start beginning to be mindful of things that you might like to change and incorporate, that is half the battle. And I would encourage you at the end to take a look and see, what are you putting in your mouth on a daily basis? What are you physically doing with your body? Take a look at your environment. Is it conducive to sleep? Do you find yourself feeling very stressed frequently during your week? If there's answers that aren't to these questions that aren't promoting brain health, actually take a minute to figure out what's one thing you could do differently that week that's sustainable. And then keep going and keep going. Just choose one. If you choose too many, it gets a little bit overwhelming, and we might not continue. Again, it's got to be something that makes sense for you. I had a woman that I was helping with personal training one time, and she said, okay, Carrie, tell me, what is the best workout routine? I want the best workout routine. And she probably wanted to lose about 40 pounds to be healthy. And she said, I want to come into the gym. I want to join the gym, and I want you to train me. And I looked at her and I said, Michelle, you do not like the gym. You don't even have a gym close to you. I do not believe that is going to be a very realistic goal for you. You need to choose something that you can do on a regular basis that's convenient. I also had somebody tell me that they couldn't exercise because they were a single mom, and she was raising 4 kids on her own, young kids. And we looked at her schedule, really couldn't find a lot of time. And plus, because some of the kids were so young, she couldn't really go to the gym on her own in the morning. But I said, you know what, one thing you could do is, why don't you, I know with 4 kids, you are definitely shopping. Why don't you park as far as you can in that parking lot, even a couple times during the day? And she said, what, that's not going to make a difference. And I said, listen, it's something, right? And just adding those extra steps made her feel, also in addition to some exercise, it actually made her feel good that she was accomplishing something. So there's always something you can do. And I would just encourage you to take a moment during your day, step back and evaluate objectively, not through the lens of your own eye, but see through a brain health filter, what are you doing that you maybe could do differently that would promote your brain health? So thank you for listening in today.
Carrie, thank you for that outstanding course. And we do have some questions to ask you, and just a reminder to those of you getting CEUs, We haven't met our goal of 60 minutes yet. And depending on when you logged in, you must complete the 60 minutes in order to get credit. So please stay online as we go through some of these questions. So one of our attendees wanted to clarify a statement you made about our brain becoming insulin resistant.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to go over that again briefly for our audience?
What can happen is insulin is, first of all, to kind of take a step back, insulin is necessary in our bodies. It's produced by the pancreas. What its job is to help when our body digests food and breaks it down into components, and especially carbohydrates such as potatoes, rice, get broken down into individual components of sugars, if you will. Those molecules then go into, our food goes into, is broken down into pieces into our bloodstream. In order for the sugars to get absorbed into the individual cells in the body, including the brain, insulin is necessary to open the door. So what happened, and normally if you have a set amount of sugar, a healthy amount, there's always a certain amount, there's an insulin response. The sugar's taken up out of the blood, and then the insulin retreats again. But what happens is if we're frequently eating too much sugar or a lot of sugar, and we have cravings, then there's more insulin necessary on a more regular basis in the bloodstream to uptake that sugar from the bloodstream. The problem is with the sustained presence of insulin in the brain, in some cases it can produce an insulin resistance. It's like the signals that trigger, okay, I've got enough insulin, there's too much or there's too little, stops working. And it's not as sensitive. So the problem is then the sugar doesn't get taken into the cells as it should, and there can be some problems with that. I will say that I am not a doctor, so I would definitely encourage you to consult some research articles or your physicians if you need more information about that. But it is, hopefully I answered that question.
Thank you, Carrie. Another question is around the issue of sleep. Actually, I've got a couple questions from our attendees. One is, does a prescription or over-the-counter sleep aid give the same benefits as quote-unquote natural sleep? That's a great question. Yeah.
You know what, Kim, that really is a great question. And again, I have to back up and say that I'm not a physician or a pharmacist. I think one thing I will say, though, is I think it's important to also look at a big picture of a person's life, because if a person truly has been unable to sleep and has such a deficit, if perhaps a prescription medication is needed on a short-term basis just to kind of give them some sleep, that might not be a bad idea. However, the quality of the sleep, I'm not sure. What have you heard anything, Kim?
I'm just going to speculate that a prescription sleep aid isn't going to give exactly the same benefits as natural sleep. But right. I completely agree with you that if a person just is sleep deprived, it's going to cause all manner of problems, including, cognitive deficits. So I think, people try all the natural interventions first, and then if they must, then they might try a prescription. So I want to keep moving here because we've got a few more things. One of our participants was really taken by the fact that your explanation of the cleanup occurring during the brain, during the sleep. And she wanted me to let you know that she's a family caregiver, and this has really helped her to understand how her husband's sleep apnea could have contributed to his having Alzheimer's disease. And so, and she goes on to state that when her husband did get his CPAP machine, he immediately reported feeling better rested. So I'm really pleased to underscore the importance of this whole arena of sleep, because when you experience sleep apnea, it goes beyond just making unpleasant noises. I mean, you're stopping the breathing and for moments and decreasing the flow of blood to the brain. And so this is an area that people really need to sort of look at as excess disability, and need to check into that. And Medicare covers the sleep test, and so we want to encourage that. Right, Carrie?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that point up about Medicare too.
Okay. Oh, so the person that asked about the insulin-resistant brain just said, thanks, I'm actually at the doctor's waiting now. I'll ask.
Oh,
I know, I know I was insulin resistant prior, but not now, but anyway, so that was good. You just did an intervention, Carrie. Isn't that wonderful? I love it. Let's see, what else do we have? Yeah, I have a question here about, in talking about nutrition and diet, and you talked about fish and meats. In your opinion, what are the best kinds of fish or the best kinds of meats? Can you just drill down a little bit more into which are good? Is there any specific kind of fish that's good, or meat?
The fish has kind of gotten a little bit of an interesting debate, because fish or fish oil that contains fish is valuable because it has the omega fatty acids that are omega-3, but the problem is, and certain fish have a higher concentration of that, salmon, for example. Now there has become a debate between fish that are farm-raised versus caught and naturally. People were kind of veering toward purchasing farm-raised fish because fish caught in the open ocean had higher levels of mercury. Mercury is toxic to the body. However, now there's some issues with the farm-raised that aren't good. I think you just need to be aware and ask, try to find out a little bit of the source. Kim, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I remember like the earliest studies on this actually said that any fish has a benefit, that the salmon, as you said, was the best, but they said even if you don't like fish and you eat tuna salad, that there might be a slight effect from that. So interesting. And then I think the meats, it's just the lean ones, right? The less fatty ones, maybe?
I would think so. And for those of you that are wondering the difference between, well, I don't like fish, is meat okay if I eat lean meat? A lot of that has to do with the amount of time it takes to digest meat versus chicken versus fish. Meat takes the longest of your body to process through. And just being mindful that, unfortunately, to the best of our ability, a lot of our foods contain hormones and toxins and things that we're not even aware of. So just try to just become a little bit more aware of what you're buying. And yeah, and the fat is a big component of the meat. Lean meats are best, and unprocessed.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Carrie. So we really do need to read the labels and ask the butcher and all of that. So Carrie, I just want to thank you so much for this wonderful lecture. And we have come to the completion of the webinar today. I do want to also, of course, thank our sponsors, O'Connor Mortuary, Alzheimer's Orange County, Care Choices, Hospice and Palliative Services, and a special thanks to our new co-sponsor, Caring Companions at Home. So, hopefully, we will see all of you next time. Tuesday, February 12th, the topic is Connecting and Communicating in Dementia Care, and the speaker is me, Kim Bailey. So that'll be really fun. Thanks again, and as we indicated earlier, as you leave the webinar, you should get your evaluation popping up on your screen. please take a moment to give us that valuable feedback. And if you want to learn more about education opportunities or upcoming webinars, trainings, etc., you can visit our website at www.alzoc.org. Thank you all and have a great day.